So last year at Davos, you started a project studying power, and tell me some of the ways you can see power dynamics at work here at Davos.
So I had one last night, actually. I was walking out of a reception, and a guy came up to me who I guess I've met briefly in past years, and he said, I have this student who's brilliant. I'm wondering if you would be willing to meet her, and mentoring her will enrich your life. And I'm like, whoa, back off. You're asking me for a favor and you're trying to convince me it's good for me? Listen, I'm happy to try to be helpful. But if you're trying to ask me to help you, just be honest about it. And I think what I see in that dynamic, as in so many, is people feeling like they're in a position where they lack status or power and then trying to overcompensate and claim it. And it just makes it worse.
And what made you so interested in power, and how is it changing now?
Well, I got interested in it because I went very quickly from hiding in academia to all of a sudden engaging with people who were powerful. And I was fascinated by the fact that many of them were much more human than I realized. I was struck by the fact that they were very often not sure what to do with their power, and especially the fact that they often underestimated the power they had, right? So you take somebody who goes from, a fun example here is Maria Konnikova. So Maria is a fellow psychologist, New Yorker writer, best-selling author, but she's been very good at publicizing her ideas, but not making herself that visible. And for her new book, she learned how to play poker and went in a year from not having played a hand to winning the World Poker Championship, or one of the championships. And people come up and she feels like she's the same person, but people are like, oh my God, you're a genius. Can you teach me how to play poker? Can you teach me how to think about risk? And I watched a lot of people not know how to respond in that situation where all of a sudden they felt like they were being put on a pedestal and they just wanted to have a normal human interaction. So I think that's the dynamic that's changing today. I think there were times, there were rare moments where that happened, but it's so common now for people to just catapult into seats of power because of social media, because of the way that the world is networked, because of how easy it is to start a tech company with an app in your basement. And I think that means people gain power much faster than they used to, but it's also way harder to hold on to it.
And just so the old power, the people that have been in power for a long time, what are they struggling with now?
I think they're struggling with a few things. One is trying to figure out how to keep their power, right? So if you're a giant company, you're constantly living in fear of disruption, right? And then the other piece of it is also trying to figure out which of these tools should I pay attention to, right? Like, how do I become tech savvy? There are people here who do not have email accounts and have never sent or received an email. How do you exist in the world?
You wrote a book about givers and takers, and you can identify a giver or taker in some ways by what they do when they have power. Who makes a better leader, givers or takers, and who ends up as leaders?
Well, I think that's the paradox, right? So we have a wealth of evidence that givers are better leaders than takers. Takers tend to be overconfident. They swing for the fences, and they end up often taking unnecessary risks, and they have more fluctuating volatile performance if you track what happens to their company's total shareholder returns or return on assets. There's some really fun hedge fund data that if you're a taker in the hedge fund industry, and one of the ways they score that is by when you're in a job interview, they videotape that, and then they see whether you smile at somebody else's misfortune. So like Schadenfreude and takers do that more. They're excited to see other people fail because they think that means they get to succeed. They actually have over 10 years significantly lower returns. But in the leadership context, takers aren't just overconfident. They also tend to squash other people's ideas. They leave other people feeling devalued. They have a very hard time hanging on to talent because if you're a star and somebody is constantly exploiting you, what do? You take the first opportunity that you have to work somewhere else great and you leave. So givers are great leaders in the sense that they focus on lifting other people up rather than cutting others down. They're constantly developing the people below them, but they often miss out on leadership opportunities because they don't do the degree of self-promotion that's necessary to get on the radar in the first place.
And you talk about in power moves how the leaders above them are not promoting or they can't identify takers.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So I find this terrifying. So the more senior you get in your career, the better you think you are at judging character, right? And you actually say, look, this is how I got there, right? It's like, hey, I'm really good at knowing who's talented and who to trust, and it's part of how I gained my power. And the reality is the opposite. The more powerful you get, the worse you are at judging character because people are more motivated to try to impress you. So all the takers below you are really good fakers because they know that's how they're going to get ahead. And that means the more powerful you are, the more you have to rely on the judgment of other people. You don't want to trust your own judgment. You don't want to trust the judgment of other powerful people. If you're trying to judge whether you're hiring somebody or promoting somebody, if you're trying to judge their values, you actually want to go to the people who work with them lateral and the people who work with them below, who get to see more of their true colors. Because if you're a taker, you're like, wow, it's a lot of work to pretend to care about everybody. And so you reserve your generosity for the people that you think can, accelerate your career, and then you kind of screw over the people who work beside and below you.
Who makes better leaders, introverts or extroverts?
So I did some research on this a few years ago with a couple of colleagues, and we found that there was no difference overall in the effectiveness of introverted and extroverted leaders if you actually track the performance of their teams and their companies. But we found that whether introverts are more effective or less effective depends on the kinds of employees they had. So extroverts were better leaders with sort of reactive followers, people who are looking for direction from above, because if I'm an extroverted leader, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get you excited and fired up, and then you're ready to follow the direction I've created. Introverted leaders actually were more effective, though, with proactive employees. So if you've got a whole team of people who are bringing ideas and suggestions to the table, who are taking initiative, extroverted leaders tended to feel threatened by that. And they're like, hey, don't steal my spotlight, I'm in charge here. And that had two negative effects. One was it shut those people's ideas down, which meant the extroverted leaders didn't hear as many ideas. And two, they left their people feeling demotivated. Felt like, yeah, I had these thoughts, I thought they were good, and you kind of, you dismissed me. The introverts were much more likely to listen and make people feel valued and get better ideas. And I think we're living in a world now where we need more proactivity from employees, right? As the world is more dynamic and competitive, you can't, as a leader, see everything that's going to happen that's going to affect the fate of your company. And so given that proactive employees are more important than ever before, I think introverts are going to be more effective leaders than ever before.
So what's a way that some leaders can maintain power or collect power that is counterproductive and is not good for what they're trying to accomplish?
So there's some classic research that goes back over half a century on different bases of power. And some bases of power are actually things that you get to accumulate and hold on to, like your ability to connect with other people and gain respect, which is called referent power, right? So the things that you do to cause people to like you and admire you, you carry those with you no matter where you work. Expert power is another thing you get to hold on to. So if you build a skill, if you accumulate a body of knowledge, right, that's yours. But there's also positional power, which that can be broken down into the rewards that you dole out, the punishments that you create, the authority that you have, and that's fleeting because if your company tanks, all of a sudden you may not have control over rewards. You might get demoted, you might have someone promoted above you and your authority is taken away. And one of those positional bases of power is called informational power, which sounds like expert power, but it's not your expertise, it's the information that you access by virtue of where you sit. So think about executive assistants, for example. They are remarkably powerful because they get to read the CEO's emails. They have usually control over the CEO's calendar. And I think what happens when people gain informational power is they often feel like they want to hoard it. Because if somebody has the information that I have, my advantage is taken away. The reality is when you study what happens to information hoarders, they end up failing to learn anything. Basically, they struggle to innovate because other people then punish them and say, look, you didn't share anything with me, I'm not going to share anything with you. I think the more effective use of informational power is to say, look, I want to take the knowledge that I've gained access to, I want to share it with people who can use it effectively, and then you become sort of a power broker, right? People are excited to have you involved in innovation because they realize you have a lot of information to contribute.
One of the questions that you pose at the beginning of your book, I'm going to ask you, how do leaders deal with a workforce that is more empowered and more entitled than ever?
Well, I think one of the things you do is you turn your exit interviews upside down. So I did a project with Goldman Sachs a few years ago where David Solomon came in and he said, look, he was running investment banking at the time, co-running investment banking at the time. And he said, it used to be the case that anybody who wanted to consider Wall Street, we were the dream job. But now we're losing people to Google, we're losing people to private equity, and talent has a lot more power than ever before. And how do we keep them, more than a year or two? And one of the things that we looked at was exit interviews. I said, all right, how are you learning why people leave? And he said, well, one of the things we do is, when people let us know that they're departing, we ask them, why did you leave? And, why did you decide to leave? And what would have convinced you to stay? And it dawned on me, that is the last possible moment you should have that conversation, right? Which in any company, why would you wait until people are already on their way out the door to find out how you could have kept them around? And so we actually decided to flip it, and we introduced the idea of entry interviews. And we said, look, when people join the company, in their first week, ask them all the questions you would normally ask in an exit interview. Why did you join? What are your goals in the next 5 years? What's your favorite project you ever worked on? What impact do you want to have? And what are you hoping to learn? And that kind of opens the door then to tailor the job to what people are looking for. And it also shows people on day one that you appreciate them and you care about their goals, not just yours. And so I think every company ought to run entry interviews.
And I love in this book, at the end of every chapter, you offer practical tips, not power tools, but power tips. Make that very clear. Do you have a favorite one that you think that you want to share?
Oh, yeah, my personal favorite is actually on screening givers and takers. So for years I've watched leaders get fooled by these takers who are great fakers. And it turns out that you can't ask people what their own values are, right? So Sara, are you a giver or a taker?
I'm definitely a giver.
Obviously, right? Which is the first way I know someone's a taker. They're like, hey, I'm a giver.
Right.
No, outside of this context, of course. But what I think you can learn a lot from is when you ask people to predict other people's values and motives. And so there's a classic question in integrity test research where you say, all right, taking behavior like stealing from the company. How common is theft by employees of at least $10 a month? And people think about it for a while, and it turns out that the higher your estimate that other people are thieves, the greater the odds that you're a thief.
Interesting.
That's how takers rationalize their behavior, right? They're like, hey, you know what? Everybody else is selfish, and so I've got to put myself first or else no one will. And so I would say take the selfish behavior you're most worried about in your company, ask people how common they think that behavior is, and then if they come up with a high estimate, you want to find out why did they think that, and is it really the case that they're projecting their own selfish behavior onto others?